When traders think about losing money, they usually think about strategy, indicators, or the market itself working against them. But the truth is far more uncomfortable and far more liberating. You're not losing money because the market is unpredictable. You're losing money because you are unpredictable to yourself. Every time you enter a trade, you're not just dealing with price action, you're dealing with the full weight of your beliefs, fears, expectations, and assumptions. And until you bring those inner forces under control, the market will continue to extract a fee from your confusion. The phrase, "stop losing money," isn't really a command to the market. It's a command to your mind, because money isn't lost in the market. It's lost in the space between your intention and your execution. It's lost in hesitation, in the inability to accept risk, in the craving for certainty, and in the emotional imprint of your past trading experiences. Most traders think they're losing because the setup was imperfect or the timing was off. In reality, they're losing because they haven't changed the way they interact with uncertainty. The market does not punish or reward. It reflects. It reflects the beliefs you bring to the chart. It reflects your tolerance for ambiguity. It reflects your ability to remain neutral in an environment that is inherently uncertain. If your mind is conditioned to avoid pain, you will exit winners too early. If it is conditioned to chase excitement, you will enter impulsively. And if it is conditioned to fear loss, you will move your stop or avoid taking trades altogether. None of this has anything to do with the market. It is the psychological structure behind your decisions that determines the consistency of your results. This is why two traders can trade the same setup at the same moment and end with completely different outcomes. One may execute with clarity because he accepts the risk fully. The other may hesitate, panic, or interfere with the trade because he's projecting his internal fears onto the candles. The market doesn't change, the trader does. And until you understand this, the cycle of losing will repeat itself with painful accuracy. When we say stop losing money, what we're really saying is stop fighting the market with the belief that you can control it. What you can control is your state of mind. Your edge isn't the strategy you use, it's your ability to think objectively, to trust your system, and to behave consistently under uncertainty. Once you accept that the outcome of any single trade is random, you free yourself from emotional attachment. Suddenly, the illusion of control falls away, and in its place emerges true consistency. A mindset that no longer reacts to the market but responds to it with calm, structured intention. Accepting risk completely before entering any trade is one of the most transformative shifts a trader can make, yet it is also the most misunderstood. Most traders think they accept risk because they place a stop loss, size their position, or remind themselves that anything can happen. But none of that equals true acceptance. True acceptance is psychological, not mechanical. It means entering a trade with zero resistance to the possibility of loss. It means there is no emotional charge attached to being wrong, no internal negotiation about what you hope the market will do, and no fear-based interference once the trade is active. When you accept risk completely, you eliminate the internal conflict that causes hesitation, panic, premature exits, revenge trading, and all the destructive behaviors that drain accounts. You trade from a mental space where the market can't emotionally hurt you because you have already embraced the full spectrum of outcomes. Most traders never reach this state because they think acceptance is a logical process. They assume that telling themselves, "I know I could lose money," is enough. But the subconscious mind doesn't operate on logic. It operates on emotional associations created through past experiences. If a trader has experienced painful losses, embarrassment, or frustration, the mind begins associating risk with danger. Even if the analytical mind knows the stop loss defines the risk and the setup is valid, the emotional mind recoils. This internal tug-of-war shows up as hesitation when the entry is triggered, or as a sudden impulse to move the stop further away to avoid getting clipped, or as exiting a position the moment a candle flickers in the opposite direction. These reactions don't come from strategy. They come from unaccepted risk. A trader who has not accepted risk is essentially stepping into uncertainty with the hope that uncertainty behaves according to their desires, which is impossible. Accepting risk means removing the psychological need for the market to validate your decisions. Most traders enter a trade and immediately start wanting the market to prove them right. Every tick against them feels threatening, every pullback feels like danger, and every consolidation feels like the trade is slipping away. They become hyper-attuned to micro movements that have nothing to do with their system. This emotional sensitivity is a direct result of not accepting risk. When you have fully accepted the potential loss, small fluctuations lose their power. The market stops feeling like an adversary. You stop tracking every candle as if your well-being depends on it. You stop interpreting normal market noise as a personal attack on your decision. Instead, you allow the trade to play out exactly as your plan intended, without emotional negotiation. One of the biggest misconceptions is the idea that accepting risk is the same as being careless. It is the opposite. Traders who do not accept risk are the ones who behave recklessly. They avoid placing stops because they fear being hit. They oversize positions because they hope the market will reward them quickly. They interfere with trades because the emotional discomfort of uncertainty becomes unbearable. They cling to losers with the hope that the market comes back. All of this is emotional refusal to accept the possibility of a defined loss. A trader who has accepted risk is calm, structured, and methodical. They know exactly how much they are willing to lose before they ever click the button. They do not move stops, pray for reversals, or mentally negotiate with the market. They understand that their job is not to avoid loss, but to manage it. Accepting risk also rewires your relationship with probability. Every trade is just one event in a series of events that make up your edge. Without acceptance, traders fall into the trap of giving too much emotional weight to a single outcome. A losing trade feels like proof that they are incompetent. A winning trade feels like justification that they are finally on the right path. This constant emotional fluctuation keeps traders unstable and reactive. When you accept risk, each trade becomes emotionally neutral. You no longer seek validation from wins or feel threatened by losses. You understand that the outcome of one trade means nothing about your overall viability as a trader. It is simply a data point. This detachment is necessary for long-term consistency. Without it, the emotional roller coaster becomes the driver of decisions, and consistency becomes impossible. There is also a deeper layer to accepting risk: the dissolution of ego. Much of the resistance to loss comes from the trader's desire to be right. Being wrong feels like a personal failure, especially for new traders who attach their self-worth to each outcome. As long as the ego is involved, losing will trigger defensiveness, denial, or impulsive attempts to correct the mistake. Accepting risk means accepting the possibility of being wrong without emotional impact. It means separating identity from outcome. It means allowing the market to do whatever it wants without interpreting it as a reflection of your intelligence or ability. When the ego is removed from the process, losses become manageable, objective, and expected. You treat them not as threats, but as routine components of a probabilistic system. Another essential part of accepting risk is understanding that risk is not something to eliminate, only to define. Many traders seek perfect entries, perfect indicators, or perfect confirmations in an attempt to minimize or remove risk. This pursuit leads to over-analysis paralysis or endlessly hopping between strategies. The truth is that uncertainty cannot be removed from trading. The best setups fail. The cleanest charts reverse. The strongest signals break down. Accepting risk means acknowledging that no amount of analysis can guarantee an outcome. It means operating with clarity despite incomplete information. It means trusting your edge rather than searching endlessly for certainty. When risk is fully accepted, execution becomes effortless. You don't hesitate because there is nothing to fear. You don't flinch because you know the outcome is already accounted for. You don't chase because you aren't emotionally attached to missing a move. Your entire trading process becomes smoother, quieter, and more controlled. You trade what you see, not what you hope. You follow your plan, not your feelings. You allow the market to unfold without needing it to give you anything. And because you're no longer fighting the market or yourself, you create the psychological space required for consistent performance. Detaching emotionally from individual outcomes is a skill most traders believe they practice, yet very few truly embody. At the surface level, telling yourself not to get emotional sounds simple, almost obvious. But emotional detachment is not about suppressing feelings or pretending you don't care about the result of a trade. It is about restructuring the way you interpret winning and losing so that neither outcome has the power to shift your behavior, distort your perception, or push you out of your process. When you detach emotionally, you create a psychological buffer that protects your execution from being hijacked by fear, excitement, frustration, or the need for validation. This detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. It is the ability to remain centered while the market expresses randomness in real time. Most traders fail to detach emotionally because they see each trade as more meaningful than it actually is. A loss feels like a personal attack, a reflection of incompetence, or a sign that something is wrong with their strategy. A win, on the other hand, feels like proof that they have figured out the market, encouraging overconfidence, impulsiveness, or recklessness immediately afterward. Both reactions, negative and positive, are equally dangerous. Emotional attachment to outcomes creates a psychological dependence on the result of every trade, turning the trading process into an emotional seesaw. As long as outcomes influence your identity or emotional state, consistency becomes impossible because you are no longer trading from a neutral mindset. You are trading from the highs and lows of expectation, hope, fear, and overreaction. True emotional detachment begins with understanding that one trade has no significance in the context of a large sample size. Your edge plays out over dozens or hundreds of trades, not one. When you internalize this truth, you stop treating each trade like a final exam and start treating it like one tile in a much larger mosaic. The weight lifts, the pressure dissolves. You begin to see that the market does not care about your last trade, and neither should you. Each entry is simply another opportunity to express your edge, and each exit, whether profit or loss, is nothing more than a completed probability. This shift breaks the emotional cycle that causes traders to abandon their systems, chase after missed moves, or seek revenge after a loss. Another reason emotional detachment is difficult is because many traders unknowingly trade for emotional gratification rather than financial gain. They seek the dopamine rush of being right, the satisfaction of timing a perfect entry, or the ego boost of catching a big move. When emotional fulfillment becomes the subconscious goal, outcomes become deeply personal. A win produces a surge of validation. A loss triggers disappointment, anxiety, or self-doubt. But trading is not about emotional fulfillment. It is about executing a probabilistic edge repeatedly, regardless of how any single action feels. Emotional detachment means stripping away the psychological incentives that distort your motives, leaving only the process and its execution. To detach emotionally, you must also detach from certainty. Traders become emotional because they expect the market to behave in a specific way after they enter a position. When it doesn't, they experience fear, anger, or confusion. These emotions come from the belief that the market owes them something for doing their analysis or waiting for a setup. Emotional detachment replaces expectation with acceptance. Instead of expecting the market to move in your favor, you accept that it may or may not. Instead of assuming your setup will work because it looks perfect, you accept that randomness is always present. This mental flexibility removes the emotional pressure that arises when outcomes deviate from expectations, allowing you to remain stable and objective. Detachment also requires dissolving the connection between outcome and confidence. Many traders feel confident after a win and insecure after a loss, but this is backwards. Confidence should come from your ability to follow your process, not from the market's response to a single trade. If your confidence fluctuates based on recent results, then you are allowing randomness to control your mindset. This leads to shrinking risk after a losing streak, oversizing after a winning streak, and constantly adjusting your trading behavior based on short-term noise. Emotional detachment means maintaining a steady internal state regardless of the outcome. You do not celebrate wins in a way that inflates your ego, and you do not grieve losses in a way that harms your self-belief. You remain consistent because your emotions are not tied to short-term feedback from the market. Another powerful aspect of emotional detachment is the ability to let go of the need to predict. Predictive thinking invites emotional involvement because it creates attachment to specific outcomes. When you believe you know what the market will do, anything that contradicts this belief becomes emotionally threatening. Detachment means letting go of prediction and replacing it with scenario-based thinking. Instead of asking, "Where will the market go?" you ask, "What will I do if it goes here or here?" This subtle shift turns you from a predictor into a respondent. You stop needing to be right, and you start needing only to act according to your rules. Emotional attachment weakens the moment you stop worshiping certainty. Emotional detachment also influences trade management. Many traders exit prematurely because the discomfort of seeing open profit fluctuate triggers fear of losing unrealized gains. Others hold losing trades too long because accepting the loss feels painful. Both behaviors reveal attachment to the outcome. When you are detached, unrealized profit is not a source of excitement, and unrealized loss is not a source of panic. They are simply temporary states within a probabilistic process. You let trades play out according to your rules because your emotions are no longer dictating your behavior. This is where discipline stops feeling forced and starts feeling natural. because you are not fighting internal resistance every moment the trade is active. Finally, emotional detachment makes space for genuine objectivity. When your emotions are not intertwined with each outcome, you can see the market as it is, rather than through the lens of hope, fear, and bias. You stop projecting your desires onto price action. You stop interpreting normal variations as personal injustice. You stop assuming the market is reacting to your position or punishing your decisions. The chart becomes neutral. The data becomes neutral. Your mind becomes neutral. From this state, execution becomes smoother, clearer, and more aligned with your edge. This neutrality is the foundation on which consistent trading is built, because without emotional detachment, every decision becomes vulnerable to distortion by internal forces you don't even realize are influencing you. Building consistency through disciplined execution is the cornerstone of long-term trading success, yet it is one of the most misunderstood concepts in the trading world. Many traders assume consistency is something the market gives them. Consistent setups, consistent trends, consistent signals. But consistency is not external, it is internal. It is not something you find, it is something you become. Consistent results come only from consistent behaviors, and consistent behaviors come only from disciplined execution. Without discipline, every trade becomes a reaction to emotions rather than an expression of an edge. Without discipline, every win or loss becomes a justification to alter your process, manipulate your rules, or abandon your structure. Discipline is the stabilizing force that prevents the constant mental drift that destroys most traders long before their strategy does. The first barrier to disciplined execution is the misconception that discipline is about forcing yourself to act against your impulses. Most traders think discipline means fighting their emotions, suppressing fear, or overpowering hesitation. But real discipline is not about internal combat. It is about eliminating the sources of conflict altogether. When your trading rules are clear, objective, and simple, discipline becomes a natural expression of your structure. When your risk is accepted before you enter a trade, discipline stops requiring willpower. When you detach emotionally from each outcome, discipline stops feeling like effort. Discipline becomes difficult only when your internal world is misaligned with your external rules. The goal is not to become a robot. The goal is to remove the psychological friction that makes discipline feel like punishment. Another challenge traders face is misunderstanding where consistency truly comes from. Many believe that if they keep tweaking indicators, optimizing entries, or refining setups, they will eventually find a perfect system that naturally produces consistent results. This belief is an illusion. Every edge has variance. Every system has losing periods. Every method produces strings of losses and strings of wins. Consistency is never found in avoiding randomness. It is found in managing randomness with unwavering execution. If you change your rules every time you hit a drawdown, you are not executing a system. You are reacting emotionally to variance. This reaction destroys whatever edge you had and replaces it with chaos. Consistency requires staying committed to your process long enough for the law of large numbers to work in your favor. Without discipline, you never reach that threshold. Disciplined execution also demands clarity. You cannot be consistent if your rules are vague, subjective, or open to interpretation. Many traders create rules like enter when it looks strong or exit when the trend weakens. These guidelines sound logical but are emotionally flexible. They invite hesitation, doubt, and impulsive decision-making because they rely on your moment-to-moment mental state rather than structured criteria. Clear rules eliminate ambiguity. Ambiguity is where emotions creep in. When your rules define the exact conditions for entry, exit, risk, and trade management, discipline is no longer a negotiation. You know what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And because your rules handle all the decision-making, your mind is free from the burden of improvisation, which is where most traders self-sabotage. Another powerful aspect of disciplined execution is repetition. Most traders crave variety. They want new setups, new indicators, new strategies, or new patterns to keep things exciting. But trading is not supposed to be exciting. It is supposed to be repetitive. Repetition is the foundation of mastery. Doing the same thing every day, in the same way, based on the same rules, is what creates statistical reliability. The more you repeat your process, the more deeply it becomes ingrained in your subconscious mind. Eventually, execution becomes automatic, seamless, and effortless. Without this repetition, trading remains inconsistent because your process never stabilizes long enough to develop internal fluency. Discipline creates repetition, and repetition creates consistency. Another essential piece of consistency is understanding that discipline must be applied to every stage of the trade, not just entries. Many traders believe discipline ends once they get into a position, but execution has multiple phases: identifying the opportunity, entering according to the rules, managing the trade according to structure, exiting based on predefined criteria, and recording the trade for review. If you are disciplined in some phases but emotional in others, you break the chain. Consistency comes from the entire process being executed with the same level of structure. Traders who enter with discipline but exit with emotion will never achieve consistency. Traders who follow their stop losses but chase profits impulsively will never achieve consistency. Discipline is an all-or-nothing framework. Any weak link disrupts the entire probability distribution of your edge. Another factor often overlooked is that disciplined execution requires a realistic framework. Many traders set rules they cannot actually follow. They attempt to day trade while distracted, or trade large position sizes that exceed their emotional capacity. They create complex systems that require instant reaction times or constant monitoring. When rules are unrealistic, discipline becomes impossible. The trader then blames themselves for the failure, thinking they lack discipline, when in reality the system they built was incompatible with their lifestyle, psychology, or skill level. True discipline requires aligning your trading approach with who you are, your temperament, your schedule, your tolerance for uncertainty, and your emotional bandwidth. When your rules match your internal and external realities, discipline becomes sustainable. Disciplined execution also requires removing improvisation. Improvisation is where traders abandon their plan because this trade looks different, or this setup feels special, or this time is the exception. The moment you allow exceptions, you destroy consistency. The mind becomes conditioned to seek exceptions whenever fear or temptation arises. Eventually, the plan becomes optional, and emotions become the decision maker. Discipline means no exceptions. The rules are the rules. You do not bend them for excitement, boredom, fear, or FOMO. You execute them regardless of how the market looks or how you feel. This rigidity may feel restrictive at first, but it is the liberation that leads to stable performance. Finally, disciplined execution transforms your identity as a trader. When you repeatedly follow your rules, you build internal trust. You begin to trust yourself to act consistently. This self-trust reduces fear, reduces hesitation, and increases confidence, not the superficial confidence that comes from wins, but the deeper confidence that comes from self-aligned action. When you trust yourself, you no longer need to rely on hope or emotional impulses. You operate with structure, clarity, and calmness. This identity shift is the true foundation of consistency, because a trader who trusts their execution becomes immune to the psychological storms that derail others. This internal stability is where consistency stops being a goal and becomes a natural byproduct of who you are when you sit in front of the chart. Removing expectations and staying neutral to market movement is one of the most powerful psychological transformations a trader can experience. Yet it is also one of the most difficult. Expectations are subtle, often invisible forces that shape the way you interpret price action. They come from your analysis, your past experiences, your hopes, your fears, and even the way you imagine a trade should unfold. When you enter the market with expectations, you are unconsciously demanding a certain outcome. You want the trade to work because the setup looks clean. You want the move to continue because it aligns with your bias. You want the candle to break a level because you've planned your target around it. But expectations create emotional pressure, and emotional pressure destroys neutrality. The moment you need something from the market, you stop seeing it objectively. Neutrality is not indifference. It is not the absence of care or attention. It is the absence of emotional bias. It is the ability to observe price action without projecting your desires onto it. When you are neutral, you don't interpret a red candle as danger or a green candle as confirmation. You don't assume a pullback means the trade is failing or that a breakout guarantees continuation. You simply observe. You allow the market to reveal its intentions rather than forcing your interpretation onto it. This mindset frees you from the reactive cycle that most traders fall into: panic when price goes against them, excitement when it moves in their favor, and confusion when it does something unexpected. Neutrality brings clarity, and clarity brings stability. Expectations are dangerous because they distort perception. When a trader expects a trade to win, they ignore signs of reversal. When they expect a trend to continue, they overstay the move. When they expect a breakout, they jump in too early. When they expect the market to come back, they hold losing trades far longer than their system allows. These distortions are not the result of a lack of skill or technical knowledge. They are the psychological consequences of expecting the market to behave according to personal desire. Expectations turn the chart into a mirror of the trader's mindset, reflecting hopes and fears back at them instead of offering objective information. This is why two traders can look at the same chart and come to completely different conclusions. One interprets through neutrality, the other interprets through expectation. Staying neutral requires surrendering the illusion of control. Many traders secretly believe that their analysis should influence the outcome. They expect the market to respect their levels, their patterns, their indicators, their timing, but the market does not care about any of this. It does not reward effort. It does not compensate you for patience. It does not adjust itself to your bias. The moment a trader accepts this, neutrality becomes possible. When you understand that the market is an independent environment where anything can happen at any moment, you stop demanding certainty from it. This acceptance dissolves the emotional tension created by unmet expectations, allowing you to respond instead of react. Another aspect of removing expectations is the recognition that the outcome of any individual trade is random. No matter how perfect a setup looks or how much confluence you've identified, the market can still move against it. When you truly internalize the randomness of individual outcomes, expectations begin to lose their grip. You stop expecting wins and start expecting variability. You stop expecting smooth trends and start expecting fluctuations. This mindset allows you to remain balanced whether the trade goes instantly in your favor, immediately against you, or moves sideways longer than you like. When the outcome of a single trade no longer affects you emotionally, neutrality becomes the natural state of mind. Expectations also create impatience. Traders expect moves to happen quickly. They expect momentum to show immediately. They expect candles to behave cleanly. When the market moves slower than expected or consolidates longer than planned, frustration arises. This frustration often leads to premature exits, impulsive re-entries, or abandoning a valid setup altogether. Neutrality eliminates impatience because neutrality has no timeline. When you are neutral, you are not waiting for the market to validate you. You are simply observing the unfolding information and acting only when your rules signal action. Neutrality slows the mind down, allowing you to stay aligned with your process regardless of how long the market takes to express itself. Another powerful effect of removing expectations is reducing emotional volatility. When you expect a win, a loss feels devastating. When you expect a trend, a reversal feels shocking. When you expect continuation, a pullback feels threatening. Expectations amplify every small fluctuation, turning normal market noise into emotional noise. Neutrality eliminates this amplification. A neutral trader sees fluctuations as part of the process, not personal statements. A neutral trader remains calm when price retraces, indifferent when a candle spikes, and unbothered when volatility increases. Neutrality turns the chaos of the market into manageable information. Without neutrality, every candle becomes emotionally charged, and the trader becomes unstable. To stay neutral, you must also release attachment to predictions. Predictions create expectations, and expectations create emotional entanglement. When you predict, you become invested in a specific outcome. When you are invested, neutrality disappears. Instead of predicting, a neutral trader creates scenarios. They ask, if price goes here, what is my action? If it goes there, what is my action? Scenario-based thinking keeps the mind flexible, fluid, and calm. Predictions narrow your vision. Scenarios expand it. Predictions create tension. Scenarios create preparedness. Neutrality lives in preparedness, not prediction. Another element of neutrality is separating analysis from identity. When traders attach their self-worth to their decisions, being wrong becomes emotionally painful. They expect their analysis to be correct because being wrong feels humiliating. This emotional attachment destroys neutrality. A neutral trader does not tie their identity to being right or wrong. They observe, evaluate, and execute without ego. They understand that being wrong is part of the process, not a personal failure. When being wrong loses its emotional weight, expectations naturally fade and neutrality takes their place. Finally, removing expectations deepens your connection with your trading system. Instead of relying on hope or fear, you rely on structure. You trust your rules, not your desires. You act based on signals, not on wishes. This alignment with your system is what stabilizes your results over time. Expectations scatter your attention and distort your perception, but neutrality grounds you in your methodology. It transforms your execution from reactive to responsive, from emotional to objective, from chaotic to consistent. Neutrality becomes the psychological environment in which disciplined, structured, and consistent trading unfolds. Focusing on psychological control rather than market control is the foundation of mastery in trading because it redirects your attention from the illusion of external dominance to the reality of internal regulation. Most traders spend the majority of their energy trying to predict, manipulate, or outsmart the market, believing that if they can just understand enough patterns or time entries precisely enough, they can control what happens next. But the market is not controllable. It does not bend to analysis, hope, or confidence. It operates on collective behavior, randomness, liquidity needs, institutional agendas, and countless variables outside any single trader's reach. Trying to control it is like trying to control the wind. The real leverage lies not in influencing price movement, but in mastering your response to it. Psychological control is the only true form of control available to a trader, and the only one that produces lasting consistency. A trader who seeks to control the market becomes emotionally fragile because every deviation from expectation feels like a threat. When price moves against them, they panic because they feel out of control. When price hesitates, they become anxious because it isn't following their script. When volatility spikes unexpectedly, they freeze or overreact because they interpret the market's independence as danger. But the market's independence is not the problem, the expectation of control is. Psychological control removes this illusion by grounding the trader in a stable mental framework, allowing them to remain functional even when the market behaves unpredictably. Without psychological control, every fluctuation becomes personal, every loss becomes emotional, and every trade becomes a battle between desire and reality. Psychological control begins with understanding your own internal triggers. Fear, greed, impatience, overconfidence, frustration, and hesitation are not random emotions. They are predictable patterns that emerge when the mind feels threatened or uncertain. Most traders try to fix these emotions by changing strategies, increasing indicators, or modifying timeframes, but these external adjustments do nothing to resolve the internal issues. The real work is recognizing the thoughts, beliefs, and biases that generate these emotional reactions. When traders observe their internal responses with honesty and without judgment, they begin to see the repeating patterns that sabotage their decision-making. This awareness is the first layer of psychological control because you cannot manage what you cannot see. Another important aspect of psychological control is managing the impulse to act emotionally. The market constantly tempts traders with opportunities that appear urgent, dangerous, or irresistible. A spike in volatility can evoke the impulse to jump in impulsively. A sudden pullback can trigger the urge to bail out prematurely. A missed entry can create the compulsion to chase. These impulses feel powerful because they arise automatically from the emotional centers of the brain. A trader without psychological control obeys these impulses instinctively, turning trading into reactive behavior rather than structured execution. Psychological control gives the trader the ability to pause, observe, and respond according to rules rather than reacting according to fear or excitement. This moment of pause, not analysis, not strategy, becomes the decisive factor that separates consistent traders from emotional ones. Psychological control also requires a clear understanding of the role of uncertainty. Uncertainty is not a flaw in the market, it is the very nature of it. The reason most traders struggle with psychological instability is because they resist uncertainty. They want clarity before entering, reassurance after entering, and confirmation throughout the trade. But the market provides none of these. When a trader accepts uncertainty as an inherent condition, they stop fighting it. They stop trying to force their expectations onto the chart. They stop reacting emotionally to randomness. Acceptance of uncertainty is one of the highest forms of psychological control because it dissolves the mental resistance that creates stress, overthinking, and impulsive decisions. Another crucial layer of psychological control is the ability to remain present. Most emotional mistakes come from mentally leaving the present moment. Traders begin imagining future profits, future losses, catastrophic scenarios, or perfect outcomes. They project ahead and create emotional tension around events that have not yet occurred. This mental time travel pulls them away from objective observation and into imagined narratives. Psychological control anchors the trader in the present, where decisions are made based on actual market information rather than imagined possibilities. Presence reduces fear, reduces regret, and reduces the emotional noise that clouds judgment. A trader with psychological control also understands the difference between control and influence. You cannot control the market, but you can influence your own actions. You can control how much you risk, when you enter, when you exit, how you size your positions, and how you manage your behavior during a trade. These factors determine your long-term results far more than predicting market movement. When traders focus on what they can influence rather than what they cannot control, they become more grounded. They stop wasting energy trying to anticipate the unpredictable and instead invest their energy into executing their system with precision. Psychological control is also deeply connected to emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is not about suppressing feelings. It is about processing them in a way that prevents interference. Fear will still arise, frustration will still appear, excitement will still be present. The difference is that the psychologically controlled trader does not allow these emotions to dictate behavior. They feel the emotion, acknowledge it, and maintain their structure regardless. This inner stability creates an outer consistency because decisions are not made from emotional turbulence, but from structured intent. Another pillar of psychological control is separating identity from outcome. Traders who fuse their self-worth with their results become emotionally volatile because every win inflates the ego and every loss injures it. This creates pressure, fear, and defensive behavior. Psychological control means understanding that a losing trade does not mean you are a failure, and a winning trade does not mean you are superior. They are simply outcomes. When the ego is removed from the process, the trader becomes more adaptable, more objective, and more resilient. Lastly, psychological control creates a stable internal environment that allows discipline to thrive. Discipline is not sustainable when the mind is chaotic. It is not sustainable when emotions dominate decisions. It is not sustainable when expectations distort perception. Psychological control clears the internal space needed for discipline to become effortless. It creates a mental environment where following the plan feels natural, where impulses lose power, and where consistency becomes the default state rather than an aspirational goal.